So after the incident with Chum, with Noach getting drunk, and we have the full genealogy of the children of Noach, Shem, Chum, and Yefes. And the Torah goes through each one. Their progeny. First of all, Yefes. Goymer, Mogoi, Modav, Yusuf, Meshach, Siras, Ashkenaz, Elisha, Sarshish. Elisha, I'm going to suggest is, we'll talk about Elisha. Ishmael Shoinoi, these are the children of Chum, of Yefes. And now Chum, who do we have? Cush and Mitzrayim. Cush and Mitzrayim we're going to talk about. And Cush has Nimrod. He's the one that rebels against Hashem. And he has various cities, various or cities, city-states that they form his base for his rebellion, from where it can continue, from where he conducted it. And the cities were, and he has his initial city-state is Babel, Erech Hakad V'Chalnei Be'eretz Shinor. Min Ha'aretz Ahu Mehi Yotza Ashur. That's Shem, maybe. Shem left when he saw that Chum was undertaking this rebellion, maybe in the Dora Flogo, against Hashem. So what was Ashur's response? He constructs Ninveh and Rechoives Irves Kolach. What are these names telling us? And again, Resen, which is Bein Ninveh Uvein Kolach. It is the great city. What was the significance of it being the great city? And then you have the children of Mitzrayim from Chum, Ludim, Anovim, Lahovim, Naftuchim. What's this telling us? And then Canaan's children who occupy Eretz Yisrael, and then finally Shem's children. You have Peleg at the time of when the world was split, was HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem caused the world to be divided into various nations. And that's in the parsha now we're going to read that Vayikol Oretz Sofa Echos, the whole world was one language. Udvorim Achodim, when everything was united, was one. And when they were journeying, they journeyed from the east, or maybe Chazal explained, they journeyed away from Mikadmei Shalaylam. They journeyed, distanced themselves from Hashem, the creator of the world. Vayimtzu Bik'ah, they found, and what's the significance of a Bik'ah? A valley, perhaps, or plain. Be'eretz Shinor, Vayeshu Sham, in the land of Shinor, they dwelt there. And they said to each other, okay, let's fire bricks, and we'll take cement. And for what purpose? They said, let's build for ourselves a town with a migdal, with a tower whose head is in Shemaim, and we'll make for ourselves a name. And what's this name? Lest we be scattered. And Hashem descended and saw the town and the tower which the Bnei Adam, sons of Adam, had made. What's the idea of the Bnei Adam? And Hashem said, look, they're one people with one language, and this is what they've initiated. And now, if we do not, in actual fact, bring this to a halt, then everything that they intend is going to be realized. And perhaps they intend a full-blown rebellion against Hashem. We want to understand, what is this rebellion? What does it constitute? Oh no. You can suggest perhaps like this. This was, first of all, let's look at the genealogy. Some of the names. Meshech, sons of Yefes, is Meshech. Elisha, Meshech is Shin Mem. Elisha is Lamed Yud Shin, is also 340. Ish Lilushoinoi, Aleph Yud Shin, Aleph Shin Lamed, Yud Shin Lamed, 340. Shem, that's 340 is Shem. Let's look at Chum. Who is children? Cush Mitzrayim. Shin Mem. Cush Mitzrayim. It's 340. And where did he initiate where was his first kingdom located? Babel Erech Akkad Chalni Be'eretz Shinor. So Babel is base Aleph. Babel Erech Akkad. Maybe Akkad is also academy. Maybe academics is part of the rebellion against Hashem. So you got Babel Erech Akkad. Anyway, it's Babel Erech Akkad is 4. Chof V'Chalnei is 24. Be'eretz 26. That's Yud Kei Vav Kei. Maybe this was a challenge to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's really what he was about. Therefore, these cities represented the enclave of those who opposed the rule of Hashem. Be'eretz Shinor. And the reaction of that was Ashur Yotzo. That the Ashur Shem distanced himself from this. And he wanted Shinor Min Ha'oretz is Shin Mem. He perhaps wanted to achieve or Reshis Mamlachtoi Shinor. He got 26 in between Mamlachtoi and Shinor. But he Reshis Mamlachtoi, the first word, and the last word is Shinor, that's Shin Mem, Shem. And in between they've got 26. He was coming to oppose that Shem, his brother Shem, within him was contained Shem Hashem, and he wanted perhaps to outweigh that. So what is Shem's response? He leaves that and he builds these big towns. We know Nineveh was a town that was God-fearing, because perhaps it was founded on the principles of opposing Nimrod, who opposes Hashem. That's what Ashur did. He built Nineveh. Nineveh, Ves Rechoivois, Ir, Ves Kolach. And what was significant about these towns? Rechoivois, Ir, Ves Kolach. So Nineveh is known as 50, Rechoivois is 250, Ir is 70, is 320, Kolach is 340. Nineveh, Rechoivois, Ir, Ves Kolach is 340. Ashur is perhaps responding to Chum's efforts to perhaps render Shem spiritually subordinate to Chum, and therefore he will be able to maintain his rebellion against Hashem, and Shem constructs these significant cities as the means of counteracting this insidious cultural and religious rebellion. And in addition to that, he also builds Resen, which is Bein Nineveh Vein Kolach, which is 270. Resen Bein Vein Kolach, which is Ra, maybe countering the Ra. 270 here. Ir Agdoilo. Ir 270 plus Ein of Ir is 340. Shem. Again, he is coming to exert perhaps the notion of shame. And Mitzrayim, you got Ludim Anomim, Lahavim is 130, 50, 180. Pasrusim is 260. Kasluchim 280. Shiotsu Misham 320. Plishtim is Kaftorim. As with Kaftorim is 340, which is Shem plus Plishtim. Plishtim was perhaps almost independent. It's an independent nation. We don't find any of the other ones. All the others perhaps were provincial states that came under Mitzrayim, except Plishtim, which was a separate state entity. And therefore, Mitzrayim itself was represented perhaps in opposition again to Shem. And perhaps with this we can understand a little bit what's going on with Migdal Bavel. What did they want to achieve? And we've explained suggested a number of times that Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babel that they built, was a unified effort on the part of mankind. We explained that, for example, when NASA first sent man to the moon, apart from all the technological innovations, incredible as they were at the time, one of the primary innovations. So we suggested that the Migdal Babel was in actual fact an initiative to we spoke about when the NASA sent the Apollo to the moon. We said it was not just a huge technological and logistical undertaking, it was also an organizational undertaking that required such a huge input of manpower and their coordination under the auspices of one organizing group, that this had not been perhaps achieved, had not been rendered achievable till then, and represented a breakthrough in management technique itself. One can suggest that this was perhaps the idea of the Ir and the Migdal, that this huge construction of this wonder of the world, the Tower of Babel, was such that it was not really, it could not have been undertaken without the full cooperation of the whole civilized world. And this is what it represented, that this was a huge undertaking on behalf of the whole civilized world to undertake one huge project, which would, in actual fact, they'd be united under one auspices, one ruler. It was ideally perhaps meant to be Nimrod, but it was to achieve the unity of man. Maybe that's why they found a bika. There were one language, and they found a bika which would sort of encapsulate, would hold them all and unite them all. The idea was to create such a massive project, a town, with this tower, which when everyone would see it, this huge tower, 1 kilometer high or 2 kilometers high, they didn't realistically think we're going to go up there and do battle in heaven. That's perhaps a mythological notion that perhaps was not seriously contemplated. How much war can you do climbing a tower? How many armaments can you actually take? And what sort of armaments are going to be effective in heaven? Rather, it represented a metaphysical challenge to heaven. That they were saying, when heaven sort of looks down and sees this huge, massive project, when everyone views this, certainly it's essentially a voice saying that the unity, mankind is united. So I said once that maybe this was the idea, that they wanted to effectively constitute themselves as one unity, one entity of mankind. For what purpose? Perhaps because they were still under the trauma of the flood, Great Babel. And Hashem had said, we've already discussed this a number of times, Hashem had said He's never going to bring a flood on the world. And we saw that Paroi, when he wanted to enslave Klal Yisrael, he exclaimed that how are we going to deal with them without bringing a flood? And he used the expression Hava, let us unite ourselves, and we know that Hashem potentially is going to bring a flood. He would never bring a flood on the world. And they made a mistake thinking that they'll bring a flood on one person. We spoke about that at length. But essentially, this is perhaps the idea of Hashem. That they wanted that Hashem will not bring a flood on mankind. However, maybe they knew that Hashem can bring a flood against one particular nation. Therefore they said, let's unite together and we'll be one fundamental nation, fundamentally united. As one fundamentally united nation, therefore Hashem cannot bring a flood against us, because bringing against one nation is bringing against the whole world, and that Hashem has promised He's never going to do. And who's to say we really are one nation? Just because we have some declaration of the United Nations to say we are one does not constitute it as one. But if we're able to give a genuine materialistic expression to our unity, that constitutes us genuinely as one. And therefore perhaps this project of constructing an Ir and a Migdal represented a genuine joint venture on part of mankind. And to constitute them as one. And what was the purpose of that? That Hashem cannot bring a Babel. And once Hashem cannot, so to speak, bring a flood, this actually amounts to a defying of Hashem. Rebellion against Hashem. Why? Because why would Hashem want to bring a Babel? Perhaps we're conducting ourselves inappropriately. and therefore Hashem would wish to bring a flood. However, if Hashem is no longer able to bring a flood on the world, therefore we can perhaps act without having to have due regard to the potential consequences. Therefore, mankind is perhaps thereby freeing himself up from the moral restraints of obeying the divine command. He's free to do as he would wish, and without thought for the consequences. And therefore the Tower of Babel represented this rebellion against Hashem through uniting men as one. And Hashem therefore said the solution, the spiritual antidote to this has to be that we split mankind into factions such that they can never unite together as one genuine nation. However, based on what we've said now and the theme that is running through the parsha, we can suggest there was another dynamic of them wishing. Similarly, yes, they wish to unite, to show that we are all one people, but for a different reason. Not perhaps to obviate the possibility of a flood, but in being one overwhelmingly powerful entity under the tyrannical authority of Nimrod. This perhaps would represent an extreme counter pressure, counter authority to that of Shem. Shem representing the authority of Hashem, and Chum, the world, so to speak, the world against Hashem. And as such, Hashem or Shem would be in an extreme minority. Therefore, the possibility of Shem thriving and the spiritual message of Hashem permeating the world is being severely diminished through this joint venture. We've suggested, we've talked about on the pyramids, that pyramids perhaps were, in actual fact, the legacy of the Tower of Babel. That it says, Vayacht Hashem split them up, Vayacht they ceased from building the town. The town they ceased to build. However, perhaps the Migdal, the tower, they continued building, and perhaps they ceased building it in one joint location, but perhaps scattered throughout the world, they maintained this their allegiance to this project. We find throughout the world, scattered in many places, the pyramids, which all resemble very much the structure of the great pyramids of Giza, which perhaps came to actually spread the word, to essentially say that the technology and the organizational capability of mankind is unified into one joint venture of building these pyramids, which sort of come together at a point symbolizing unity. Say once again, we are unified power against Yisrael, against Shem. We suggest perhaps this is the Hava the whole time. Hava, let us unite. And Para also says, Hava, let us unite against Yisrael. And perhaps we have the musig of the Shvatim, the tribes of Israel. Why are the Shvatim? What is the significance of having the Shvatim, of Yisrael split into tribes? And one perhaps significance is that there are maybe 12 unique paths to find Hashem, and therefore Yisrael represents these 12 paths. Or there are everyone has their unique abilities and inclinations, orientations and abilities, etc. And all of these can be harnessed in the service of Hashem, and that is what the 12 tribes represent again, that everyone's unique abilities and direction, and inclinations and influence, etc., that everyone can find within the tapestry of the 12 tribes the means to serving Hashem. However, we can suggest that there's another additional element to that, namely that even within Klal Yisrael there is Chelik Hashem Amoi. There is, so to speak, Hashem has His people, His one people, and even within Yisrael we find there are various tribes and various and differences between culture and whatever and religious within the context of Yisrael. And perhaps, and we have Shevet Levi, tribe of Levi, that represents those that are completely dedicated absolutely to Hashem. However, generally, if we look at the population today, the Haredi Jews, the Torah completely committed Jews, represent approximately 10%, let's say, and that's always been, it seems. That's how Yisrael is comprised. And as such, they represent an extreme minority, 10%. Therefore, overwhelmingly Yisrael is 90%. They're not secular, but non-religiously orientated. Perhaps for that reason, Yisrael also has the identity as Shvatim, 12 Shvatim. 12 Shvatim means that essentially each one has its own unique identity. Each one is perhaps a microcosm of Yisrael. What difference does that make? That is a huge enough community. It means essentially that when examining Yisrael, it doesn't have to be done through the lens of the perspective of weighing Levi against the rest of Yisrael, in which case Hashem's portion is the minority portion of 10%. No, Yisrael is comprised of 12 tribes, and each tribe perhaps has to be measured in isolation against Levi, in which case Yisrael essentially is Levi and another tribe. It's Levi against Reuven. Each part of Yisrael really is going to be comparing itself against Levi, contrasting itself to Levi, and not just that, but is also going to be measured in terms of Levi, and not just that, but is also going to be subject to the influence that Levi can exert as one tribe against one tribe, and therefore this can create a correspondingly enhanced potential for Hashem's spiritual influence to be enhanced throughout Yisrael, such that it becomes far greater, far more significant. It's one against one, which Levi is extremely zealous in their pursuit of the will of Hashem, and therefore that becomes perhaps overbearing influence. This was perhaps what Nimrod sought to avoid, the disintegration of society into minor elements, rather to preserve the integrity of the whole of society as one, for the purpose of having a body of sufficient potency and size to oppose any undue influence of the religious zealots. And maybe for that reason Hashem has blessed Yisrael with a multi-ethnic proportional representation system, whereby there are many different unique individual factions, such that the Haredi, the Torah-orientated faction within Yisrael, is able, as many complain, to exert undue political and also religious influence. And this is the expression that uses Hava, let's unite together. Hava is 12, Hey Beis Hey. In other words, let's take the 12 elements, as in Yisrael there are 12 distinct elements, and let's fuse them into one. Thereby we can effectively oppose any potential overreaching spiritual influence that Hashem or Yisrael will be able to exert on the world scene.